talked about the building of Fort Phil Kearny. It would be under the command of Henry B. Carrington. Carrington was the man that was responsible to pick the site for Fort Phil Kearny, which was going to be used for protection for settlers traveling west and winter quarters for those settlers that would be coming through during the winter months. He employed Jim Bridger to help him find the site, a very famous Western scout, and the site that Carrington chose was not endorsed by Jim Bridger. He didn't think it was a very good spot because he thought that the fort would be under constant attack by hostile Indians during the building of the fort and afterwards. But why did Carrington pick that, Logan? Why did he pick that site? Despite the fact that old Jim Bridger said, no, that's not a good spot.
Oh, because of his wife.
Yeah, his wife was tired of traveling, looking for a spot, and she thought that area was pretty. Okay, so not a good spot. Okay, we told you that well, let's go back to this. The construction would start later, but the group that came, the population of Fort Phil Kearny is going to be about 600 people, 450 soldiers and about 150 civilians. There would be some women and children there because officers were allowed to bring their wives and children. There are 11 women and about 18 children in that group. We also told you that about 80% of the 450 military personnel there were green recruits, very inexperienced recruits. We also told you that the construction of Fort Phil Kearny began on Friday, ironically, July 13th, Friday the 13th of 1866. The civilians that were there, the male civilians' job was to be woodcutters. They cut the wood from the local trees in the forest there to make the logs to construct the fort. And we stated that the soldiers could be assigned one of 4 jobs during the course of the day. They could either dig trenches 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide by 9 feet long, or they could be assigned the task of placing the logs upright in those trenches to build the fort. Or you could be assigned to protect the woodcutters who were under constant attack from the hostile Indians, or you could have been assigned lookout duty, keeping an eye on friendlies or hostiles that would be approaching the construction site. And there was a lookout spot above Fort Phil Kearny. It was an awesome one. You could see 360 degrees, called Pilot's Knob. Okay, now we're going to talk about the characteristics of Fort Phil Kearny. What did it have inside the fort? Okay. Now, you know how long it took to build this? How long would you think it took to build this fort? Remember, it covered 17 acres of land. That's the first characteristic. How long do you think it took them to build that? Now, you're not building like a house where you're sheetrocking it in and all that. It's a fort. It's basically a boundary, a big fence in essence, but you're going to build buildings inside for barracks and stuff. Anybody want to guess how long it took them to build that?
2.5 years.
What's that?
2.5 years.
2.5 years? Year and a half? 3 what? 3 months. Yeah, only took them 3 months. And they dedicated the fort, which means it was completed. And this is kind of weird because they started on what day? Friday the 13th. They finished it and dedicated it on Halloween, October 31st of 1866. So I just thought that was kind of interesting how this is going to go, that they start building it on Friday the 13th and they dedicate it on October 31st, 1866 on Halloween. So here are the 16 characteristics that make up Fort Phil Kearny. Okay, 16 things that made up the fort. First of all, I mentioned number 1. The fort covered 17 acres. Big fort. 17 acres it covered. Number 2, anybody want to guess how high the walls were? How high were the logs on the fort?
20 feet.
You'd think 12, 16, 20. They're actually only 8 feet high. Now, you remember soldiers in those days. You know what the average height of a military soldier was in this time? About 5'9" or 5'8". Yeah, they were small. They weren't very tall. So the walls of the fort were 8 feet high. That's the second characteristic. The third characteristic is, anybody want to guess how many logs were used in the construction? 4,000. 4,000. You're going to say 6,200 or 62,000? Whatever. But about 4,000 logs were used. That's a lot of logs to cut under hostile Indian attack daily. So 4,000 logs were used in the construction of the fort. The fourth characteristic is what was in the middle of the fort. Directly in the middle of the fort was what? Anybody want to guess? Flagpole, 120 feet high. So right in the middle of the fort was a flagpole, which was 120 feet high. The fifth characteristic of Fort Phil Kearny, there were 3 steam-powered sawmills inside the fort that would be used to cut logs into lumber so they could build some of the other things we're going to talk about. So they had 3 steam-powered sawmills inside Fort Phil Kearny. That was the fifth characteristic, the 3 steam-powered sawmills. The sixth characteristic, they had a brick factory in there to make brick. They had a brick factory. Seventh characteristic is they had a hospital in there. Hospital. Okay, now we'll leave it up to guess a little bit. Anybody in this row want to guess what else they might have had in there that was a characteristic? What? No, that's a good guess, but they actually did not have a school. Wives taught their own kids. That's a good guess. What kind of goes with schools though? What do they have in there? If you don't go to school Monday through Friday, where do you go on? Church. Very good. They had a church in there. Yep, they had a church in there. So we've got covered 17 acres of land. Number 1, walls of the fort were 8 feet high. Number 2, more than 4,000 logs were used in the construction of the fort. Number 3, in the middle of the fort was a 120-foot flagpole. Number 4, 3 steam-powered sawmills. Number 5, a brick factory. Number 6, a hospital. Number 7, a church. Number 8. Anybody in this row want to guess of something you might have in there?
Wait, what?
We're on number 9.
Are we?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay, well, so a general store. That's correct. A settler's store. You know who ran it? You ever heard of, this is kind of interesting. You ever heard of Al Simpson, that longtime senator of Wyoming? Anybody ever heard of Al Simpson?
Yes.
His grandfather ran the store. That's pretty cool. Yeah, Al Simpson's grandfather, longtime senator. He spoke at George H.W. Bush's eulogy. He gave a eulogy during George H.W. Bush's eulogy. I don't know how old he'd be now, probably in his 80s.
Yes.
But his grandfather ran the settler's store, they call it. Okay? Okay, how about another, anybody else got a guess in here? In this row? Go, how about a guess here, in this row? What else would you have inside that fort? Mrs. Montoya?
I think a mess hall, a place for them to all gather to eat.
They didn't really have that. I'll give this way, they ate in their barracks.
Okay.
So they had barracks for the enlisted men, yeah.
Okay, very.
We'll talk about that. That's a good guess, but they wouldn't allow that because the guys would not be on the wall. So let's go through this again. 1, covered 17 acres of land. 2, walls of the fort were 8 feet high. 3, more than 4,000 logs were used in the construction. 4, in the middle of the fort was a 120-foot flagpole. 5, there were 3 steam-powered sawmills. 6, there was a brick factory. 7, there was a hospital. 8 was a church. 9, settler store. 10, barracks for the enlisted men. What else might they have? Anyway, Donovan.
Was there like a jail?
They had a jail. Very good. They had a jail. People were lawbreakers. They had a military jail. Very good. Cody?
Like an armory.
What do you mean by that?
Like weapons and like a gunsmith?
No, they didn't. That's a good guess, though. Anybody got a guess on anything else they think they might have had in
Maybe
there?
like restrooms.
What'd you say?
Restrooms.
The restrooms were basically outhouses, but most of the time they just went outside.
Ferry.
No?
A corral.
Now, wait a minute. Whoa, a what?
Corral.
Corrals for both the cavalry horses, from the cavalry, and any livestock, like all those mules that pulled those wagons. Very good. A lot of kids don't get that one. Corrals. So let's see what we got here. Covered 17 acres of land, walls were 8 feet high, 4,000 logs were used, 120-foot flagpole in the middle, 3 steam-powered engines, a brick factory, a hospital, a jail, a church, corrals, barracks, and a settler store so far, right? Anybody have, there's still a few more. What else might you have in there?
Didn't you have houses for the?
Yeah, you skipped barracks for the enlisted military jail.
What, Elizabeth, I think you got it.
Houses for the civilians?
Well, homes for the officers and civilians. Very good. Homes for the officers and civilians. Very good. And 70 acres is quite a bit of land. Now we're missing 1, 2, I think is all. We got 16. How many you got?
13.
13?
Did they have like a post office?
Yeah, that's a good guess.
No?
Express, but not in most stuff that's up.
Let me see, Mike.
Pony Express went through.
We have 13 now.
Oh.
Water tower?
Oh, they had a bakery.
Oh, I
Oh,
see
Oh,
that.
did you? Yeah, there you go. Bakery. Had a bakery.
Wow.
Water tower?
What else would you need for the cavalry horses?
Food.
Oh, yeah.
Farm.
Need a
You
barn
said
or
farrier,
house.
but what do we call where a farrier works out of? Close. They call it a saddle shop, where they did the blacksmithing and the farrier work and took care of the saddles and all that. Saddle shop, it was called, yeah. So how many we got now?
15.
One left? This is a weird one, you won't get this one. They had, remember I told you they had the U.S. Army 18th Regiment there, right? Well, the regiment had a band.
Oh,
And they
my
had
God.
quarters only for the 18th U.S. Army band.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go, see?
They had band quarters.
They did. They had band quarters. Yep, they had band quarters.
Yeah.
What else? Hey, think about it. What were they gonna do for entertainment there? You know, they get the band together? Well, it was too far away. Now, wait a minute. Speaking of ladies of the night and Mr. Salzman's, what he would want in the bar, they wouldn't have, listen up, they wouldn't have like saloons in those days with alcohol, although alcohol was prevalent, but they didn't have a specific place for that because they didn't want the soldiers drunk, seriously, drunked up and not on their best game day. They had a job to do. Okay? Well, there you go. All right, any questions on characteristics of Fort Phil Kearny? Okay, now, I want you to put yourself in the place of an enlisted man, a lowly enlisted man. And I'm going to tell you kind of what your life would be like, okay? So here is the life of a lowly enlisted soldier. I would say less than luxurious. Now you tell me what you think about the pay. You know how much they got a month?
$1.
$13. It was about $197 in today's dollars. So they got about $200 a month. That's not a lot of money, really. But that's what they were paid, $13 a month, which is about $197 in today's dollars. Their barracks basically had a dirt floor and one stove to warm the entire barrack. So it wasn't very nice. Okay, they lived in barracks with a dirt floor and one stove to keep themselves warm. Now, what might they have done in those barracks to cook and use the heat that would rise upward for warmth? What might they done in those barracks? They cooked down there. I gave it away. No, what they do though, they dug basements in these barracks and did the cooking in the basement, so to speak, so the heat from the cooking would rise into the barracks and keep it warm. So they actually dug basements in the barracks to cook and use the heat that would rise upward. Now you might be asking, how many men were in each barracks? About 60. 60 men. They weren't very big. I mean, I think you all have friends and stuff. I could take 60, I don't have 60 best friends, because the definition of a best friend is someone that would be happy if you succeeded, wouldn't be jealous. So if Branson was named Student of the Week, a good friend would be happy for him, not saying, oh, gee whiz, how'd you get that? Who'd you kiss up to for that?
That's pretty neat.
So, yeah, so there's not a lot of good friends, but spending time with even 60 people that you really like would get old in a small area after a while. So about 60 men in each barrack. Here's what they usually ate. This was their typical meals. Hardtack. Anybody know what that is? Nobody knows what hardtack is?
She was using some.
Like
This morning.
It's in our.
Who was?
Elizabeth,
Were you using hardtack this morning?
yeah, what did you just eat?
Oh,
Yeah, I would, no, listen,
Kind of like-
that would have been luxurious. Hardtack is a, look, you ever seen a saltine cracker?
oh.
It's about, it looks like that's about that thick, and it's so hard, thus the name, hardtack, that you could barely chew into it, but it was substance, it was, I'll see if I can find some, you can buy it, samples to kind of show kids, I'll see if I can't get some. But hardtack's like a big saltine cracker.
I thought
Okay.
it was jerky.
No, that would have been a luxury there. Okay, they also drank coffee. That was pretty common, although I think most would complain it wasn't very good. Not like driving down to the coffee cabin or whatever it is down here and get yourself a mocha. This was like hardcore coffee. And if you were lucky, they had brown sugar to put in it. Lucky, not always. That was a luxury. So hardtack, coffee. If they were lucky, they got a little brown sugar to throw in that coffee and sweeten it up a little bit. They ate a lot of lard. And I think we know what lard is. It's fat. They ate a lot of lard. And they ate a lot of salt pork. Anybody know what salt pork is?
Pork that's salted.
Yeah, it's very salty, dry pork that tastes kind of bad. So, because of this bad diet, a lot of the soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny got what's known as scurvy. And it's basically a vitamin C deficiency. Okay, so because, and it's on your ID sheet, because of the poor eating habits, a lot of the soldiers got something called scurvy, a vitamin deficiency disease, lack of vitamin C. So I'll tell you what scurvy does to you. You don't have to write this down, but just so you know. Scurvy is a condition caused by a lack of vitamin C in the diet. Signs of scurvy include tiredness, muscle weakness, joint and muscle aches, a rash on the legs, and bleeding gums. Scurvy is common among people deprived of fresh fruits and vegetables for long periods of time. And that was those guys. Now, I want you to think a little bit, because why would they have to eat this crap?
Because I can't go outside.
Budget.
Why?
Because I'm not good outside.
Well, unbelievable. All this abundant game outside the fort is off limits from Colonel Carrington, because he didn't want him to go outside the fort because he was in fear they would be killed and attacked in doing so. That's how bad it was. So, although wild game was available outside the fort, Carrington banned hunting by the soldiers in fear of having them killed by the hostile Indians. They were already outnumbered tremendously, and he wasn't going to have a chance of having more killed. Now, who could go outside and hunt if they wanted to, though? Civilians could. They didn't do it much either, because the chances of you coming back, seriously, were not great. Okay, so not a lot of people left the fort. Their job was to build it, and it was there to provide protection. Protection, okay? Now, there was a chance that there was some treats going on at one time. One treat that could be sometimes available to these soldiers were freshly baked pies. And a Negro cook by the name of Black Susan baked these pies and sold them to the soldiers for $1 each, which would be about 15 bucks now. So about $1 each she sold those. And boy, I'll tell you, that $13 a month, there was always some saving up for one of those pies. Well, Colonel Carrington found out about that, and he cut it off. No more pies. Why would he do that? What was Black Susan using to make those pies at her own property? Military flour, military canned fruit, those types of things. And so when he found out she was profiting herself, he cut it off, and there was no more fresh pies for the men. Wasn't a great life to be in the military. Not a lot. That wouldn't really help your self-esteem, would it? Or your morale. Remember, I told you they had morale problems there, not only because Carrington was considered weak by his men, but he did things like this. Okay? Made it unenjoyable. Now, let's talk about officers. What was their life like if you were an officer? I think you'll find it'll be much different. they had nice homes built for them and their families. So officers didn't live in barracks, 60 to a barrack with a dirt floor and one stove. They had, each officer had a house built for them. And I'll just give you an example of Colonel Carrington himself. His wife Margaret was with him at Fort Phil Kearny, and their 2 sons, and they even had a butler there by the name of George. So Carrington led a great life. I mean, he had a brand new big house built for him. His wife was there, his 2 kids, he had a butler by the name of George there. So officers had it way better than enlisted men at Fort Phil Kearny. Now, as we mentioned, the safest place for the soldiers and civilians was inside the fort. Life outside the fort was very risky. People became very vulnerable. They had a greater chance of being killed by the large number of hostile Native Americans in the area. But if you were in the fort, it was very safe. Why? Because Native Americans aren't usually known for going on the offensive. They're a defensive nature. So they weren't going to attack the fort. That wasn't their game. So as long as you were in the fort, you were safe. But if you got outside that fort, they didn't have any trouble because they felt like they were defending their land when you were outside the fort. So if you stayed in the fort, you're in pretty good shape. But if you went outside the fort, you weren't. And that's why those woodcutters were in such danger all the time, because the Indians didn't want to build the fort. Once it was completed, where people stayed? Inside. With the exception of Ridgway Glover. And we'll tell you that's the next subtopic, the story of Ridgway Glover. Interesting dude, Ridgway Glover. Well, this is kind of an interesting